first podcast of the year, actually, for me. I've just been a bit lazy getting to podcasts. I'm sorry.
Barely the beginning of February, man. You're fine.
No, but no, there's a lot been going on, and I'm up here in New York with Grayson. We just went through a bent press focus session using a little bit more of that joint specific training approach that he's been using. And we got into some good conversation. This kind of topic of this podcast is something that kind of recently been on my mind of just kind of like, I'm gonna set up and shoot this podcast and get some of these thoughts out that I've been thinking about. But it's a great opportunity here with him to jump on and hash out some of these things and get some of his perspective on it. But talking a little bit more around this feeling of like maturing in your strength training or in your training practice, I guess, in general. And like, that's what I feel like I've been experiencing in recent years is like, I love strength training. Like, I love it so much. Like, I just want to find ways to keep doing that for the rest of my life. And recently had a really nice deadlift training cycle where I actually planned out some numbers. I was like, I think I have the ability to probably do something that I haven't done in a while or ever, like here with the way training's been going. And I hit a pretty good personal best. And it felt good, but like I was saying to Grayson that the feeling afterwards felt like I wasn't attached to it. I wasn't attached to this PR. And it was just kind of a weird feeling because I've been in this different headspace in years recently of, trying the old methods, getting to learn all those things and getting strong again in training on like a barbell and in those ways that I was really attached to when I was younger.
Right.
But then kind of doing something like that and thinking, I don't really feel like attached to that in a way where I have to do that again or I have to follow some kind of regiment that continues. Like, it felt good, but the first thing that came onto my mind was kind of like, okay, I can go do a different lift now and, like mess around a little bit. But you kind of, when I was talking to you downstairs about that, you really kind of resonated with that as well too. We got into a little bit around that thought.
Yeah. I mean, it's been interesting. I mean, I realize it's probably just because I'm getting older, but I think about how much of my training was dictated entirely by the numbers, right? Like hitting a PR like that would almost be stressful because then I would tell myself in my head, well, now you hit this number, so now you have to plan all your training accordingly so you can hit a higher number in the future. And it would be like really a stressful approach. But I did that, I mean, shit, for most of the years that I trained and actually had some focus on hitting numbers. Like that was it. It would almost be to the point where like I would sabotage myself because I'd be so worked up about today's the day that I'm going to try to hit this PR. Yeah. What if I don't do it? I mean, all this.
You put a lot of stress on yourself. Like, I think it is good to be competitive with yourself and probably be in those environments or those times in your training where you kind of have that approach because it kind of pushes you to kind of hit a certain thing. But it feels like, and some of the people I've talked to, is like hard to see past that. And you see a lot of people get out of strength training because they're never going to hit those pinnacles again, or you just don't feel like you can move towards something. And Atlas Power Shrugged, who we always promote on our pages and have talked to in the past, he made a great post recently about competition lifts versus like lifting in the gym, and just this dogma around like, if you're not doing powerlifting lifts or Olympic lifts, then you're not strength training. And it was a really cool lift, or a really cool post, because it really kind of highlights that like hole that we're kind of putting ourselves in. And oftentimes as you're maturing in your training and you find yourself moving further away from that stuff, like finding that passion again, really, in my training and experience recently, is coming from exploring the other things that are there to uncover. So it was a cool perspective that he shared around that.
Yeah, it is. It's funny. I mean, it seems like we both had a similar experience. Like training has just kind of evolved to getting like that without really consciously thinking like I need to just stop doing that. I mean, I definitely had a period where, especially when my body just was like, my late 20s was really beat up from training, and like doing all the same training, wasn't making a lot of progress. That was a good step for me to kind of get away from all of that stuff. I mean, even like just pattern movement in general, and just do like a total reset. But when you were saying that downstairs, I was like, yeah, like that's really been the progression. Like it's almost like it's evolving more and more about going by feel entirely. And there's no time frames that I'm worried about from the last time I did this number. It's like I'm just intuitively trying to go forward like that, but it feels right.
Yeah. And that's even doing the bench press session today. Like we both haven't been training that, and we know what's involved in that. So it's kind of stressful as you go into it because you're like, I haven't bench pressed in forever, But you get warmed up into it, you get into it, you start kind of bouncing, the techniques and skills off each other, and then, you're doing bench presses. And you're just kind of like laughing, having a good time. And it's just that environment of feeling like I can envision like someone else maybe like returning to the things they've done before through this thought of just like coming back to the skill of it rather than the, I guess, stress or expectation of how it should go. And it's like, it's a skill you've spent time learning at some point in your life. And if you stay healthy and you stay, keep certain components into your training, you can come back and play around. And that's kind of like what we had done today. It was kind of like, it was a good feeling afterwards to be like, yeah, we can meet up and have a bench press session and train hard. And like, we didn't hit our best. We haven't been training it. We know we could. After today's session, it's like, oh, we probably could train up and hit a PB.
Oh, yeah, right.
But it's a cool,
more regular.
Yeah, it's a cool, I think that's maybe kind of like that maturing in strength mentality maybe just comes from that like all around approach that we've kind of found ourselves in now, where our training range, a lot, like it's heavily into our training. We're training the strength components, but keeping it well-rounded. Like finding that space now is like where I feel like things are going.
Yeah. I mean, in my experience, like that component of like having such a extreme focus on the numbers, and I was never able to separate like the numbers and like some kind of time constraints on those numbers. Like, well, if I hit this number at this, and then at this point in the future, I should be able to hit this number. That for me, like really, I spiral down into like making training less and less fun too. So taking that out was like a revelation as far as like, holy shit, like this actually is fun. Like that's why I started doing it, because I enjoyed it, and I now have to be like weighed down by these unreasonable expectations, because they are unreasonable at some point, right?
Yeah, at some point. And I think it's like the time you spend wanting to learn some of these things, even if it is flexibility. I mean, you see people like that as well too, that have put time and effort in the past in some kind of extreme form of flexibility training, which may be like a split, and then find it hard to come back to that too. And it's like, well, you may not be in splits again, but you can still train flexibility and not detach yourself from like these kind of areas of training. And that's kind of, I think you can think about the time that you have to put in, or that you have put in, as something that you can come back to and just kind of keep rolling out that skill. And I don't know, it's just a cool headspace to be in. Like that was the first time in my life I'd ever felt like I'd put an effort in like that, actually had a result, and been like, yeah, it's like I can move on to the next thing.
What a milestone, right?
Yeah, the PB was the mindset. The PB was the, I'm not like attached to this in a way where it's like gonna affect other things in my life or in training. Or
this is gonna set the tone of my deadlifts now forever, because I have to live up to this moment.
I have to give up flexibility training now because I just hit this new PB. Right. So now I just have to completely consume myself with this and try to. And maybe that's why training's been going good too. It's because going by feel, like learning these new things and keeping it all there in one. But
I you know what I realize when I'm thinking about like the transition to feeling this way versus the old way. I mean, I think it's hard like when you first start training, because that's kind of the standard, right? Like, oh, you're going to start squatting now, we're just going to add 5 pounds a week and keep going up. And generally when you first start training, like that works great, right? I mean, damn, you do anything when you first start working out and you just keep seeing this amazing progress. But I feel like that really sets the tone on what you expect from training, you know? It's like, okay, now 20 years later, well, no, you're not going to squat today and start putting on 5 pounds a week because you're probably 5 pounds off your ceiling already, you know? Like, it just doesn't work like that. And when I had made that transition to kind of just going towards that more intuitive approach, like, I really struggled with that, thinking like, I'm squatting once a week and like I've squatted the same weight for the last 4 weeks straight. You know, like I have to add weight or I'm not going to make any progress, which was, you know, it's funny to realize, like, made me realize how attached I was to that mindset, and getting out of that was like a crazy mental shift.
I think that's kind of bred into a lot of us when we start training or start pursuing a fitness goal. It's like the goal becomes you have to pick some kind of goal to push yourself to achieve something. So it was like weight loss. You know, you get people doing a marathon or strength training and just like picking these certain goals that keep them focused and attached to things, and then you just become really attached to that. It's like I can't be my best unless I have some kind of like specific goal. And they're important, but I think too you just get to this point where you can think about the goal of practicing a lot of the things that you've learned. So I mean, diversify your training.
Yeah.
Like that's how I feel like it's been like 20 years now of training pretty hard. It's like by constantly diversifying it and trying to learn new things. And then you get to this point where you feel like you can come back to all of them in a way and kind of cycle through, and you still have a lot of those skills there in some way, shape, or form. You're not your best, but it feels good. Like today's bench press session felt so good.
Yeah.
The PR was that we haven't bench pressed in however long, and we pushed close to PBs.
Yeah.
Just from like, you know, the training we've been doing. The environment was pretty cool. Like how you don't see two guys bench pressing in the same room very often.
Right.
That's a pretty cool like environment. Imagine seeing that in the gym, let alone one person bench pressing. What the hell is that person doing? And then you see two people doing it at the same time.
I feel like the bronze era lifters were stirring today.
Yeah, they were.
Happy about that.
Yeah. Apparently you used to have to bench press to join. Like you had to learn that lift first. That was the entry point to.
I love that. You want to join this gym? You got to bench press.
Yeah, what do you bench press?
That's
But yeah, cool. I think that's an important win to share or mindset to share for the listeners, is that, you know, above and beyond like sharing all the ways you get to maybe like these more extreme levels or higher levels of training or higher levels of flexibility. I think it's important to share like kind of like how that's evolved for us, and it feels to me like the last couple of years has evolved into this like detachment from always having an expectation from training. It's like as long as I keep going, like set a goal, but if you don't hit the goal, you're trying your best, and that's like the most important thing.
Yeah, I mean, if you look back, or if I think about all my history of training and all the times that I hit numbers, and the times that I hit numbers where the times where I hit numbers, the little one wants to come down so bad.
Grayson's daughter's here.
When I hit numbers where I was really focused on a regimented program and I was super diligent about following that, and the times where afterwards, you know, when I stopped doing that and it was just totally casual, like it wasn't the program that I followed exactly, right? It wasn't that. It was the fact that I was regularly training, right? You know, it's like, I think that is probably the best thing to tell yourself. It's like, it doesn't matter how you do it. Like if you find something that works, but if you got to stick with it and keep doing it and enjoy it. And I think out of the lifters that I know who've been training for a long time, like you've been training for a long time. I mean, you know, for our age, I feel like that's a pretty good amount of time to be training. The people who seem like they are able to stick with it and don't burn out and really enjoy it still go that way. They go away from that really regimented stuff because it's mentally, it's taxing, I think.
Yeah. Well, I think what you start to realize what you get out of it the most is just the enjoyment of being in that kind of physical practice, which strength training is obviously the theme of this episode, is like how you mature in strength training, because I don't think as many guys talk about that, because, you know, strength training as a whole is always talked about and discussed as like this endeavor of like max strength and peak performance, and, you know, the elite do this, and it's cool to hear those stories as well too. Don't get me wrong.
Totally.
I'm watching those stories and throwbacks of like the greatest lifts ever.
Yeah.
But I think there's a lot of merit to be had in hearing, some guys that have been doing it for a while and, who may not be, you know, top of the world in whatever strength endeavors we do, but pretty well rounded and maintaining that strength. And it's, I think that's a big part of it, is just like not attaching yourself to this kind of expectation that your training should have some kind of extreme outcome, but the enjoyment of the practice itself.
Yeah, I can't. I mean, I think you could probably make an argument that that's probably the most important component of training.
Yeah.
Is like enjoy it so you stick with it, because that's obviously what works the best, right?
Yeah.
Two, I think something that I didn't know a long time ago when I was training, I had that mindset like I'm sorry, honey. Later. Come down later. It was like, oh, I conventional deadlift. That's my deadlift. I hit this PR on a conventional deadlift. Well, now if I do any deviation from a conventional deadlift, I'm not going to be able.
Yeah.
I'm going to lose my conventional deadlift. And it's like, your brain, it doesn't know if you did a conventional deadlift today or a hack deadlift.
Yeah.
All it knows is that a lot of that posterior chain tissue was loaded.
Yeah.
And the reality is, like, the longer you do the same thing, the more efficient you get at doing it. So you're getting less stimulus out of repeating that conventional deadlift over and over again. It's like, start Jefferson deadlifting, start hack deadlifting.
Yeah.
Like, you ran a completely, non-conventional deadlift cycle and then came back to conventional and, like, hit a huge PR.
Well, that was the thing. Everyone, I share that and everyone's reaching out like, how did you do that? Like, what kind of program did you run? Like, I really didn't run the specific program, but the last couple of years have been about getting strong as hell in these unconventional lifts, Jefferson lift, hack lift. I have a list of them. I actually have a post prepared where I'm going to share the variety of deadlifts that made my deadlift strong recently.
Right.
That's what it was for me. Also because I was a shit deadlifter, to be honest. Like, I just didn't have a strong back. So instead of just tediously doing conventional deadlift training over and over and over again and reaching that same stimulus and not seeing any result, I'm going to do some weird shit. One arm heavy dumbbell deadlifts, one arm deadlifts, like just all of these things. And as those went up, my deadlift's just been climbing. And, it was kind of that moment where it's like, oh, like it all matters. Like you got to try to, make an effort to learn, the application of strength in like all of these areas. And if you truly like want to push yourself to some kind of level, but I think in hindsight, it was like, I think I'll try to do something more traditional to see where that deadlift lies now that I've been messing around for so long.
Yeah.
And it was a cool little surprise, I guess, at the end. It's like,
That's cool. I mean, it really shows you the value of that kind of approach. I don't want to make it sound like you shouldn't program that way or follow that, because I think it works for some people. But my feeling is that there isn't the most longevity in doing it that way, just from the mental component of burning out on it.
absolutely. And like, how quick do you max out those traditional approaches to those types of training? Like for me, very easily. Like, take some kind of traditional approach and I hit the ceiling pretty quick.
Absolutely.
Like, and then it's like, well, what do I do? Like, this is where I'm at. And then I think that's where a lot of people maybe have those questions, is like, then you start, we're referencing to what Atlas Power Shrug was saying. It's like, then you start getting into a certain sport and, you start using equipment to lift more weight and stuff. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like, it's its own sport and community and everything. But then it's hard to disassociate yourself from that approach. That's what strength training is. It's like, strength is strength. And
Yeah, and really, the more ways that you can express that is really ideal, right? Like, I think about my previous years of training, especially when I really had a narrow focus. It was like, I'm strong on deadlift, decently strong on deadlift and bench press and squatting and a couple Olympic lifts. And then if you take me outside of that, it's like it goes to nothing. There's nothing available outside of that.
So we are teaching tomorrow, New York. We're doing a workshop. Grayson's coming in as a guest presenter, and some of the things that I've been teaching, which first workshop happened in November in Australia, and was lucky enough to have Grayson in-house. Yeah,
That's awesome.
it was just so, like, that was the first time we actually met. so had him there and, helping demonstrate a few things and just being a little more involved with like some of the range of strength style things as well. So yeah, that's going to be cool, man. We're going to get into flexibility, mobility training. Like one of the big takeaways for me, and I don't know if like you see this too, where you did some teaching out there as well too in some different areas, but even just that was like, you kind of get into your circles of people online and people that are doing this stuff, and you assume it's like everyday knowledge, like flexibility, mobility training, those approaches. And like when I got out there and I was presenting some of the basics, when I talked to people afterwards, they were like, that was like one of the best parts, was just hearing this basic breakdown of flexibility work. And I was like, the takeaway afterwards was like, man, this stuff still needs to be,
This is important.
it was sent, like still needs to be taught and like presented to people. Like it's a very, I don't know, it's just, you get into those circles and you just think everyone knows it. Everyone knows this stuff.
Well, that's the interesting thing about social media. I mean, wherever you are, whatever you're into on social media, like you find more people who are into that. And so now, you've got a ton of followers on Instagram or whatever. You have this community that you've built, these people who are all into the same thing. So it just starts to feel like, yeah, everybody thinks like this. This is how everybody trains. Like this is just the norm. And then you realize like we live in a little bubble of that stuff where people are into that and they get it. And that's not the majority of people. That's the minority for sure. Yeah. So it is cool. It is cool. I mean, it makes me feel like, it just makes me feel a lot better about this stuff because you get through those basics enough times and you're like, nobody wants to hear this shit anymore. It's been done. It's played. Everybody knows this, and you're like, oh, whoa, this is totally valuable. Like this is the foundation for all this other stuff.
Yeah, because even coming back from Australia was like, even just some of the content I was sharing after that was coming back to just sharing a lot of those basic things that people, and then saying the feedback's like, oh yeah, like I didn't know that. It's like, oh yeah.
It's very reassuring.
So yeah, it'll be good to get into, and yeah, we'll see how that goes from there. But I just wanted to get on and just do a quick one, guys, and just share just recent thoughts around strength training and, setting goals and expectations for yourself. Yes, we need to do that. We need to push those, but don't attach yourself to them in such a way where, it kind of just bleeds into like every facet of your life in a way that's maybe not healthy. Because I've been there, and you get to a point where it's just not a very healthy thing. It's kind of a reverse of what it's supposed to be doing.
No, yeah. I mean, if your training is causing you stress, unless you are like a paid person to work out or something, like find a way to eliminate that. And probably just relaxing about a lot of the protocols that you're following is a really easy way to do that.
Yeah, diversify your training, learn some new shit. But yeah, that's it, man. I just wanted to jump on and just rap a little bit about that.
Great first podcast of the year.
Yeah, it'll be good.
Cool to do it here too.
Let us know what you think.
Yeah, thanks.